the embargo affects Cubans, both in the island and in the diaspora, in tangible and unintangible ways. The tangible ways are related to the sanctions. There are sanctions that make more difficult to travel to Cuba, that make more difficult to trade with Cuba, that make more difficult to have any type of financial transaction with Cuba. As a result of that, the economic life in the island is more difficult. And it's more difficult not only for the government, but also for the population in general, because the type of sanctions applied against Cuba had not been the type of smart sanctions that were applied in other countries, against other countries. Issues such as food, medicines, everything has been included. There are also a so-called 10% clause that any article, any good or service that include 10% of American components cannot be exported to the island, and nothing that have 10% more 10% or more Cuban components can be exported to the United States. So it affects not only the economy of Cuba directly, but the relationship between Cuba and the rest of the world. And there is also the intangibles. It is in the way the Cubans presented is that to a country suffering an economic war, because the United States, not another country, is the most important country in the world, is more than 20% of the world economy, that a country that is subject to such level of sanctions is basically suffering an economic war. And a country at war cannot have a democracy of peace. And therefore, it's more difficult to have an open, clear discussion based on merits among Cubans about the best way to organize politically and economically the country. I think this answer has to do a lot with the previous one. And here the issue is that President Obama has been courageous enough to say that a policy of 50 years failure is enough. And therefore, it is time to try something new. And here what we have is a lot of hope and opening of the visions of potential different ways to organize not only the relationship with the United States, but also the Cuban economic and political system in general. Things such as, for instance, the number of travelers going to Cuba. There has been an increase of more than 500,000 travelers between the moment when the American travelers to Cuba, between the moment since the moment the President Obama became president. There has been a large increase on remittances by Cuban Americans to their relatives or friends in the island. Some people talk about between $1 billion and $2 billion that are helping the creation of the new economy, the new private sector that is emerging as the result of the economic reforms implemented by Raúl Castro. And there is also a more opening relationship between people of American society and Cuban society. For instance, religious communities has been empowered by their relationship with their brothers and sisters in faith on the other side of the Strait of Florida. You need to distinguish two things. One thing is the identity of the Cuban state. The Cuban state is the result of the historic event that happened in 1959 called the Cuban Revolution. And this changed the Cuban history in a way that reinforces the idea of nationalism and the idea of some equity in the way the economic model is designed. So there is a political culture that emphasizes not only on individual freedoms, but emphasize on the role of equity, equality in building a minimal plateau of economic, cultural, and social rights, without which no idea of political democracy will be meaningful for the Cubans. And whatever, I'm not saying that this is an static situation, but the legacy of such an event, the possibility of a Cuba who stand up and say no to the United States in a significant way, and say the type of subordination, political subordination that existed before 1959 is unacceptable, and we are not going to go back to this situation anymore. So in these two areas, I think that the strong legacy of the revolution will remain wherever the country wherever the country go.